ahead and get started and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Susan Frankel and I'm the CEO of the National Runaway Safe Line, and welcome. Not only do we have this awesome lunch and learn planned for you, but today, November 1st, is a big, big day. It is the beginning of National Runaway Prevention Month, and we are super excited to be launching this month and launching the series of events, activities, way to engage, and this enormous 30-day focus, which quite frankly, as we will say, and the National Network for Youth will say, and I'm sure many of you will say, continues 365 days a year, not just 30 days of the year, but this is the time where we actually just amplify it even further. But we are super excited to kick off these events and this month. Encourage you to engage in as many ways as you are able. There are amazing resources to access, all of which is free on our 1-800-runaway.org website, and we'll be sharing the links in the chat this afternoon as well. But to get to the good stuff and to kick things off, we are really honored to have with us today 3 members of the team from National Network for Youth, Darla Bardeen, Andrew Paloma and Anthony Simpson, who I am going to let sort of talk more in a minute about themselves and their roles. But I also just really want to acknowledge National Network for Youth has been just a critical, essential partner of National Runaway Safe Lines for forever. And not only just, again, that 365-day work round the clock that we all do together and jointly, but also as such an essential partner with the National Runaway Prevention Month, and have helped in so many different ways I couldn't even possibly list them today. We are so grateful for your partnership and for the relationship that we have together and the work that we know that we are doing together to make a difference in so many young people's lives. But I will turn it over to the 3 of you to share the incredible knowledge and just wealth of the gifts that you are giving us as we launch National Runaway Prevention Month. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you, Susan, for that great introduction. And I just wanted to introduce the rest of our team. So I'll start with Darla to give yourself a brief introduction.
Everyone, my name is Darla Bardeen. I'm the Executive Director here at the National Network for Youth. I joined the team in 2013 as Policy Director and became the Executive Director in 2014. Thanks.
Yeah, and then our on the ground work in Philadelphia is being done by our amazing fellow, Anthony Simpson. So Anthony, if you can give yourself a brief introduction as well.
Hey. So as Andrew said, I am working specifically within Philadelphia County with National Network for Youth under a 2-year fellowship with Stoneleigh. And my job is more of a diplomacy mission with service providers within the city of Philadelphia that offer services to homeless youth, or attempt to. My job is to make sure that they actually do.
You will do it. So I'm Andrew Palomo. I am the Director of Community Strategies at the National Network for Youth. So I do a lot of the community work that the network engages in. So I'm going to be sharing my screen now, and you'll be hearing from my amazing colleagues throughout the presentation. So in our Lunch and Learn today, we're going to go over building strong collaborative relationships to end youth homelessness, driving systemic change at the local level. So we're going to go over some of the work that we've done at the National Network in our communities across the United States. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about our work on the ground level, our community work, our cross-system collaborative projects. Darla will then be going over the federal policy updates and how all of this actually comes together. So when we talk about policy to practice and practice to policy, so putting how our work on the ground level impacts our federal policy and vice versa. And then opening it up for questions and answers. So keep asking your questions, put them in the chat, and we'll be answering them at a later date. So our mission as the National Network for Youth is to transform systems so that no young person in America experiences homelessness. So this mission of ours, we do it 365 days a year. We try to do it within 40 hours a week, but it's usually more than that because we know that this work is daunting. And then with your support, your help, all of you on the ground level, you also help us achieve this mission, right? So this is what we do. We do it in 3 ways. We have our National Youth Advisory Council, which is a group of young people with lived experience who inform everything that we do. We do policy education and policy advocacy. So we meet with legislators, we meet with community partners to inform them about how to improve their system to end youth homelessness. And then training and technical assistance. So being on the ground level, providing trainings, providing technical assistance for communities. And that's primarily where Anthony and I do our work. And then Darla is primarily that advocacy portion. And then our colleague Yori, who's not on the call today, is focused on our National Youth Advisory Council. So our local cross-systems collaboratives were really a project that we launched in 2019, right? So looking for community solutions and community support to end youth homelessness, and really starting to look at innovative solutions in our work. And we took an approach that combined collective impact and design thinking, right? So we wanted to incorporate both of these strategies into our work because they both has shown that they are really impactful in community work, and they've been shown to be effective in other areas. So when we say collective impact, right, like we really are trying to get community members to agree on a set of goals, on set of outcome measurements, and really trying to solve the problems together. We also incorporate elements of design thinking into our work, specifically human-centered design, right? Like, so how do we design new systems, taking into consideration the young people that are being impacted by this, right? So our traditional way of working, our traditional models have not worked. We all know this, right? Like, and how do we then create new systems, new safety nets, right? And really trying to brainstorm outside the box thinking. And that's really where human-centered design really comes. We take the perspective of young people and how are they being impacted by the policy, how are they being impacted by programs, and then redesigning those solutions, right? And through this process, we've worked in communities throughout the United States, right? So for some of these communities have been intensive, where we've actually been on the ground level providing intensive TA. Some communities have been light touch, where like we've just provided like TA over the phone, or we've just like provided some financial support. So just wanted to put that out there that like it really looks unique for every community depending on where they're at, right? Like, so we talk about meeting young people where they're at. What we're talking about here is meeting communities where they're at, right? Like, so some communities have a youth action board, they have goals that they all want to achieve, and they just need that little push. Other communities need a little bit more intensive work because they haven't done youth work, or there are no YABs, there are no youth service organizations in their community. So we're starting from the ground level. So that's a little bit more intensive. So that's one of the beauties of our approach, is that it's not like a one size fits all kind of model, that we really do try to work with communities. But with that, like at the basis and the foundation of our work is youth-led systems change, right? So we center young and youth adults in our approach. So that word has been used a lot, centering youth and young adults in our approach. But what does that really mean, right? Like, and I think that's where I know in my discussions with Anthony, like how do we then really operationalize this into our day-to-day? And Anthony will be going over how that is done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. So essentially, when we're talking about youth-led work, it's important to kind of differentiate it from a buzzword, right? Because oftentimes we're talking about authentic youth engagement within systems change or advocacy work overall. It can feel performative, right? Or it can feel as though you're gonna have these young people sharing trauma within this enclosed group and maybe having a promise of it being kind of disseminated out, but oftentimes it just kind of like remains insular. So you can start with the first one. So some of the ways that we try to remedy this is by making it a super collaborative process, right? And having people be set up for success. Really investing in people and making sure that they have the tools, right? Because oftentimes you kind of give someone the experience, right? The expertise, but they're lacking that critical component of strategic sharing. They're lacking that critical component of, comfortably relaying their story and also kind of feeling safe afterwards, which is a super important aspect. You can go ahead. Reduce barriers to participation. You would think that intrinsically having less and less margins and subjugations when you're talking about working with young people would be the ideal approach, but oftentimes within a lot of service providers, not just within Philadelphia County, it becomes an issue where a young person has to have a certain referral or a certain level of bureaucracy that prevents them from being able to share their story, right? And obviously these margins, like definitions of homelessness, right? These definitions of what someone's trauma should be don't usually match with what it actually is, the reality. You can go ahead. Setting clear and realistic deadlines. We're young people, right? And if you're working with young people who are an affected population, it's not just enough that you have them, right, advocate and be the voice for young people, but at the same time, you have to also uplift them as individuals, which just continues the work and makes it not only a job opportunity, right, but then intrinsically and like very nurtured instead of like nature wise, you kind of guide a young person to be able to pass on that skill. And it's more of a passive and comfortable level when it's with a peer. And then go to the last one. Sorry. Highlight the impact of the work. This kind of rounds back to everything, right? Once you have those first three components, just having the work be highlighted and appropriately attributed to the young person, obviously to their comfortability level, whether it be last name, first name only, or pseudonym. It's just important that when you are utilizing young people as consultants and experts, that you also put them not only at the forefront of the finished product, but also compensate them correctly. $20 gift cards is not compensation for 4 hours of consultancy work. You can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. And I think that you bring up a good point. Like, we're having that assumption that young people are going to be paid, right? Like, and they are getting paid for their expertise, and that they're at the table just like everyone else at the table is getting paid. So that does form the foundation that wasn't in that one slide. But going back to that slide, I think you're absolutely correct. Like, these are all like the elements that we want our communities to have, right? Like, we want set them up for success, right? Like, and what does that mean? And what does that mean for your community? And even reducing barriers. I know you and I, Anthony, have discussed like, how do we get bus cards, right? Like, and because how are they going to get to these meetings, or how do we get them laptops so they can be on the virtual meeting? So yeah, all of that.
Even stable internet.
Yeah, exactly. Even stable internet. Like, how do we provide all of that? So all of this needs to be before we even start like the community work and like systemic change and having young people at the table. These are the what needs to be done prior. And then like when you're engaging with young people, we started doing this like model of co-learning and continuous feedback that we labeled cascading mentorship, right? Like, and something that we've been working on with the University of California, Berkeley, of how do we then transfer knowledge and have continuous feedback loops so that way young people do feel supported, right? So it really is this cascading mentorship where like people in the program levels who might be an executive director or a program manager is having those conversations, those leadership development conversations with a young leader, and then that young leader transfer it to new members. And then the whole group then like gives feedback to the program. And then we make changes, right? Like, and then that whole cycle begins again, right? Like, so these are just things that like when we are operationalizing, like what does it mean to have youth, support youth and young adults and centering them? We really mean like we're providing them with supports, we're providing them with payments, we're providing them with feedback, and we're listening to their feedback about our system, right? Like, so all of this needs to be happening and in place in order for systems change to occur, right? If we don't have young people who feel like what Anthony said, who don't feel safe, who don't feel, who are not getting compensated, then we're never going to achieve that systemic change, right? Because they're not going to be invested. Like, why am I going to go to a meeting if I'm not getting paid? Everyone else in that meeting is getting paid, right? So,
oh, but you're getting pizza.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Because that totally, compensates for payment, right? So I know, like what Anthony said, like we throw out these buzzwords, systems change, right? And centering youth and young adults, right? Like, but what does it mean, right? So this is another thing that, like, when we face systems change, right? It's about shifting the conditions that are holding a problem in place, right? So a problem continues, right? Youth homelessness continues. How are we shifting that so we can shift the conversation so that we can address what's going on that's keeping it in there, right? So this is not our definition. It's actually from Social Innovation Generation. So the website is there. So I know they are sharing the slides. Feel free to go there and explore more. But this is where we really focus on that systemic change, right? And our approach, right, has been the first thing we discussed, right? We discussed about strengthening youth voice. Our second, like once youth voice is strengthened and there's a YAB and young people feel motivated and they want to be engaged, then we go into vision setting, right? We help facilitate discussions with community stakeholders, right? And we've been doing that work. Anthony's helped me facilitate one of those community meetings in Montgomery County, and he's going to go over it in a little bit. And then identifying the problem. So what's keeping youth homelessness in the community, right? Is it definitions? Is it lack of resources? What's going on, right? And is it multidimensional? And oftentimes it is, right? And then how do we then set a goal, right? Like of what can the community do to end youth homelessness? So what can we do? And then design thinking, right? Like once we go through all of these steps, then like, what do we do? How can we design a better safety net? What can be different, right? Because our traditional ways of tackling the problem have not worked, right? Youth homelessness is still a problem, and it's continuing. We've been talking about this since 1973, right? Like, and it's still present, right? So how can we think outside the box, right? How can we then create new ways of ending this? So that's our process, right? And incorporating, like I said earlier, incorporating many elements of collective impact, of design thinking, and putting them all together in order to effectively do community work. And at the top, and at the very top, is that youth voice, that like that's what needs to be there, right? Like without it, you can't do the other steps, right? Like, so that's really like our thing. And just some examples from the field where we've done some of this work, right? Internally, it's something that we've have been talking about a lot with our NYAC. So these are our NYAC members there, and how do we support them? How do we create fellowships? How do we pay them effectively or appropriately? What supports do they need? Actually, we had a team meeting this morning and had those exact conversations about the supports that our NYAC needs in doing this work. Because the reality is many of them have jobs, they have full-time jobs, and we're asking them to have this side hustle, right, with us. And what does that, how can we better help them and in order to do the work. So just some examples, right? Like I think some examples are like, how do we give them like computers or stable internet and all that other stuff that Anthony mentioned earlier as we move forward. Our other community conversations, right? This is the Western Pennsylvania COC. So we've had a large group. This was in 2020. This is pre-pandemic. No one's wearing masks. So just putting that out there that it was definitely pre-pandemic. But it was a great opportunity to get people together and have these conversations about youth homelessness. And they've had these, and shout out to the Western COC because they did get a YHDP. So they're doing even more stuff to end youth homelessness in their area. But those conversations started, right? Like, what did it look like? And it was, we've been on the ground level since 2019 in the Western PA. And it's been amazing to see how people thought, people saw youth homelessness as not being in their community, to not including couch surfers as homeless. And now, like when I went there like last month, and I asked the same question: what does youth homelessness look like? And everyone came up with like, oh, it's couch surfers, it's young people living outside, right? So their definition even changed. And having those community discussions have been pretty powerful. And even talking to them, like we designed this system map, right? Like, what is this? What does the youth homeless system look like currently in Western PA? So we had those discussions, and this is a spaghetti mess, right? Like, it's complicated. I have no idea where things are going. So this is a visual representation of their current youth response system. And this is where conversations took us, and how to then like create a better system, a system that is more efficient and that works for young people and informed by young people. And that's where their process is now, right? Like, their process is now that they're doing that. They're improving their system. They are going after funds collectively to go after well, they got the YHDP, so hopefully the system will not be as convoluted as seen here. And then other communities where we've had these community conversations. One recently in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and I'll toss it over to Anthony to explain some of the work that or some of the things that happened in that community conversation.
Cool, and I will catch that toss. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, so like he said, Montgomery County, in a lot of ways, it's very similar to Philadelphia County, right? When we're talking about just the severity of housing instability and the different ways that it can manifest, right? We're talking street homeless, couch surfing. But one of the big differentials between Montgomery County and Philadelphia County is population size, right? When you're dealing with Philadelphia, you're dealing with a more dense population. And what happens is that, you kind of try to hide the problem, but it ends up spilling over, right? You have kids in private and charter schools who are going home to no food in the house, or going to school with the same clothes from Monday on a Friday. And it really kind of goes unnoticed. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the Montgomery County Youth Advisory, Youth Action Board, was really make sure that it was purposeful sharing, right? So we had some young people from the Montgomery County YAB, just name a few: Khalif, Christina, and they basically kind of just outlined ways in which like they were literally suffering right in front of their school administrative staff, in front of their principals, in front of their classmates, and intrinsically not being able to fulfill the first step of their hierarchy of needs, which is shelter. And so one of the things that happened was that we had different service providers within Montgomery County attend this listening session. So we had Colleen Landy from the school district. We had Kyle Tribble, who was doing work directly with impacted young people within Montgomery County who were experiencing housing instability. And one of the things that came up was not only was the definition of homelessness very murky, right, and it kind of can become bureaucratic, but also just the definition of where you're able to receive services from can become very mixed up. So we had people who touched both Philadelphia and Montgomery systems. And so logistically, it was hard to even work out a sort of base or support network for these young people to have. And we also kind of discussed silos, right? So we had a jam board and we discussed essentially what can happen when you're kind of in an insular cyclical environment, right? And it's just something that visually we wanted to have, because when you use words like silos and echo chambers and these visual metaphors for intrinsic broken parts of the system, it can kind of get lost within the kind of definition. So we really wanted to make it black and white for you guys. And this is a part of a bigger Jamboard that we're also going to be sharing out a little later on, but this is a taste of it. And that's me.
Yes. Sorry, I'm having difficulties controlling the slides, but thank you, Anthony. And I think you're right. Like, I think those conversations we had in Montgomery County, right, like talking about like what were those things that are continuing youth homelessness in the county. And it was really interesting to see like how, like I think my two takeaways was how young people went back and forth between Philadelphia and Montgomery County. That was really interesting, that there was this flow that like everyone's like, was like, yeah, I went to Philadelphia to get services because there was none in my home, right? Or like in my community. That was really interesting, and being able to share that and to the providers that are there, because there's a disconnect, right? Like, but having these conversations about like what's happening, like, right? Like, and then trying to find solutions. And then what Anthony was saying, that like, we then had those community conversations about what are those silos that are present and identifying them. And we use a Jamboard, right? Like, which is like for those of you who have not used it in the past, it's a virtual whiteboard, right? Like, so being able to put stickies and write on it, right? And just some of the things that people have seen, like, right? Like, there's no physical shelter in Montgomery County for young people. There was a disconnect between like, perceived disconnect between child welfare and the homeless sector, right? And so how do we bridge those gaps, right? So they're in the starting phase of having those conversations and being able to then like, hopefully our next phase will be finding solutions and then being able to move from there, et cetera. And then our work in Philadelphia, which Anthony is leading, our work in Philly. So just giving him a chance to summarize all his work in 2 minutes.
Oh, all my work in 2 minutes, that is adequate. So basically I started September 1st, and it was a part of a fellowship, right? And one of the big things was just making things actually work for the young people that they wanted to serve. And when I say things, I'm talking about services, I'm talking about support networks. And I'm not only just talking about specifically runaway or homeless youth, but also, like Andrew mentioned earlier, that intersectionality of youth who are involved in the child welfare system, but also are experiencing housing instability, or involved in the juvenile justice system and is also experiencing housing instability. So one of the things that I identified within Philadelphia was that there was definitely an awareness of the issue, right? That's one thing that we've kind of been fighting for, especially kind of rolling into the early 2000s. And we've seen these creations of these services, and we've seen these employment bodies that claim to help give youth employment, and we've seen housing programs that take youth off the street and whisk them away from this life. And we've seen, kind of these different kind of systematic placeholders for really what is Band-Aid for an antiquated system, right? It's really a problem of Philadelphia being unable to kind of be reactive to the problem of youth homelessness. Because when they think about how to advertise these services to homeless young people, they're thinking of strictly young people. They kind of cancel out that intersectionality of homelessness, right? So now you're trying to advertise to someone on TikTok who may not have a data plan, or you're trying to create an app that may be able to help them find services, but the first base part of that is having access to a phone and internet connection, and then having a stable internet connection while you're outside. And obviously, you know, billboards, other things are options too, but really my work is just finding ways to engage not only the service providers, but the young people who are in need of those services, and connecting service providers with each other so that things are less cyclical, and, you know, you don't have 5 buildings downtown all doing the same thing, but having no one communicating with each other. I think that was like 2 minutes.
No, that was perfect, right? So a lot of our work in Philadelphia really is like, how do we then just serve as the momenter, the people that are creating that momentum, right? Like, so I think like what you were describing, how do we get young people to be at the table and to be to move things forward? How do we work with all the providers, like, right, like, because there's so many, right? Like, and there's like, how do we then make sure that like things are moving, right? Like, so I think that's where a lot of your work actually really lies, in that systemic change. And then something we didn't mention, and I think is also vital to say, is that we hired someone from Philadelphia with lived experience. And right, like, so I think that was just something else that like, right, like it wasn't an outsider coming in to doing the community work, right? Because that's not what we wanted to do, right? In our work in Philadelphia. So that's really like and as we are doing like these community work to do systems change, if there's one thing, right, like that you can take away from this, really is that like empowering young people to do it, right? And how do you operationalize? How do you make that happen? How do you then support them? And what does that look like for your community and your agency, right? Because the community discussions and the community goal setting and going after grants, we know how to do that as communities, right? Like it's the other side of that, which is how do we then like get young people to be our partners, to share the power with them? And that's really like what we're doing, like with Anthony, like sharing power and building them up, right? And that's really like has proven to lead to systems change, because people are actually listening. Western PA is one of those areas where I really do think they're listening to their YABs, right? Like, and they're listening to the young people and creating programs that are meeting those needs. But so with that, right, I'm going to toss it over to Darla to then talk about federal policy and how all of this this policy to practice helps guide our work.
Thank you so much to Andrew and Anthony for sharing a little bit about the important work that you all are doing in communities across the US and deep dive in Philadelphia. I hope we're all excited about federal policy. I nerd out and get very passionate. I just confess that now. Put all your questions, the nerdier the better, in chat. And I will happily answer them at the end. And Andrew and Anthony will probably need to tell me to quit talking, which they are more than allowed to do. So next slide, please. I just want to kick us off with just a powerful quote. Each and every one of you are powerful. Your lived experiences and your expertise as a service provider, or whatever your expertise is, can help shape the policies that are created. And like Andrew and Anthony were saying, and young people with lived experience should absolutely be shaping the policies that are created. Next slide, please. So at the National Network for Youth, we firmly believe that a comprehensive approach to preventing and ending youth and young adult homelessness is only going to be successful if there's a commitment to racial equity and if youth leadership is at the forefront. Next slide. And centering youth voice, which I know Andrew and Anthony spoke about a lot, but it really means engaging young people as equal partners with adults in the decision-making process. That gets to the sharing power. So programs and activities are developed with youth rather than for youth. And that goes the same for federal policy, because federal policy drives practice, and good and innovative practice hopefully drives and change and transforms federal policy, which is what truly achieves systemic change, when the laws and policies and the funding streams that govern systems are transformed. Next slide, please. So our overarching kind of approach or truth to federal policy is that we firmly believe that substantial and bold investments in prevention and response to homelessness experienced by youth, young adults, and families is the only path forward. Next slide. So we have a whole big, plan of what our priorities are for the Biden-Harris administration. I'm just going to highlight 5 of them. So these are recommendations really for federal agencies. Obviously, Congress can support it, but these are, I don't know if the infographic isn't showing up, is it, Andrew? Could you hit another button and see if it shows up? Nope. All right, never mind. I had a 3 branches of government infographic. So first, we'd like the administration to issue an executive order to address systemic barriers that youth encounter across multiple federal programs. So an example of this is parental signature requirements or a proof of a valid government ID or other vital docs before a young person is able to access a program or services. We'd like an executive order to kind of remove those barriers to what young people need across all federal programs, because that's an issue across multiple federal agencies. Also, the president does release a budget annually, and we would like the president's budget to include significantly increased funding targeted specifically to prevent and respond to youth and young adult and young family homelessness. We know that funds are most likely to get to young people experiencing homelessness if that is the target population for that program. When young people are just an add-on to a program for children or a program created for adults, then by and large, young people are not served nearly to the extent that they need to be. Also, we would like the administration to support the creation of a new federal program at the Administration for Children and Families at HHS that takes a 2-generation approach to homelessness, using the most appropriate definition for children, youth, and families. And so that for us is the education definition of homelessness or the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act definition of homelessness. Also, we've asked that all federal programs capture similar outcome data, as well as collect data on racial and LGBTQ identities to improve data sharing across systems and to analyze data to identify any disparities in equitable access and treatment. And this is just a top 5. This is not all of our recommendations, but a 5th ask that we have for the administration is that HUD launch an on-demand voucher program for youth specifically, and youth experiencing any form of homelessness. So those are our high-level snapshots. Next slide, please. Some of our recent policy wins. So we were able to successfully advocate for $25 million in emergency funding for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act grantees. It's the first time the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program got any type of emergency funding. We also successfully advocated for $800 million specifically for schools to increase their collaborative efforts to identify and serve children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. This money is also able to go to community-based organizations who are working in partnership with schools. We also successfully advocated for an earned income tax credit for homeless and foster youth. And we've been advocating for its implementation to just make it an easy checkbox when young people complete a tax return. We've also been advocating for improving the HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Program, specifically, more flexibility around how the funding can be used, not just using or implementing an adult model or an adult approach on young people, but also ensuring that the same amount of money per year that the COC receives for YHDP funding remains targeted to serving youth even after the YHDP ends. We've also been advocating for expanding the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program through reauthorization, which I'm going to talk about more later. And then year over year, there has been increased funding for key federal programs that we've been advocating for, such as the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program, the McKinney-Bento Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act program, and the HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Program. Next slide, please. So the current context for federal policy. So Democrats are in control of the House and the Senate and the executive branch. That could change in the upcoming election. But the Senate is a 50-50, very narrow House majority. So Vice President Kamala Harris kind of breaks the 50-50 tie. And so that means bipartisan approaches are very important. And then currently Congress is focused on two things, a very large infrastructure package, which you might hear called budget reconciliation, and then FY22 appropriations. What are going to be, the final spending levels for federal programs for FY22. Next slide. So let's get into some of our congressional work. So the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act is a bill that would reauthorize the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. So what that means is it would update the program. Typically a program is authorized for 3 to 5 years. So technically the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act's authorization has expired, but as long as appropriations continues to fund it, then the program continues to exist. But none of the vital updates that we've been advocating for in the bill are yet in effect until we do pass the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act into law. It has not yet been reintroduced, but we are anticipating it will be reintroduced this year. We do have the same champions, Senators Leahy and Collins, and then Congressman Yarmouth and Bacon. We have asked for a new optional prevention services program to be added. And the structure would be is if you're applying for a basic center program or a transitional living program or maternity group home grant, you would also have the option of applying for an additional $75,000 per year to provide prevention services to young people who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. Also, all grants would be for 5 years, staged every 2 to 3 years. Geographic distribution would be considered. Programs would be required to provide training to staff on human trafficking, trauma, sexual abuse, and assault. Mandatory non-discriminatory practices would be in statute. Right now, they're only in regulation. Next slide, please. And then we've also increased the amount of money per year that a provider can receive. So $225,000 to $250,000 a year if Congress appropriates less than $200 million a year for the program. Once we get the program at more than $200 million a year in funding, then grant awards would go up to $250,000 to $275,000 a year. We've also significantly increased the total authorized funding amount. So right now, the authorized funding amount for the entire Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program is $150 million. And that's kind of where we are with appropriations for this year. So between House and Senate bills that we've seen so far, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act is getting about a $14 million bump in funding in FY22 to around like 149.8 million or 151.2, whether you're looking at House or Senate numbers. So this would be more than doubling the authorized amount in statute. And so the law would have that BCP and TLP should have 225 million appropriated, street outreach should have 75 million, and the new prevention program should have 67.5 million, which gives us a total of 367.5 million. And then also we put a specific 2 million every 3 years for a national study so that we can gauge our progress in ending youth homelessness. So this is significant. So having an increased funding amount in law doesn't automatically mean that that will translate to appropriations, but it is very, very persuasive to appropriators. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a process of how the bill becomes a law. I won't play Schoolhouse Rock for you all, but we are expecting the same exact bill to be reintroduced in the Senate and the House, and we do hope that those same bills move through the committee process and floor process, because it has to be the same exact bill that passes both chambers, and then it'll go to the president for signature. So the goal is to really get the bills introduced, which will happen this year, I'm confident. And then it needs to go through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then it needs to go through the House Ed and Labor Committee. And so we really need, then the leadership in each chamber to make it a priority. So we need Senator Schumer to make it a priority in the Senate, and then we need Pelosi to make it a priority in the House. So the call to action really is, as soon as the bill is introduced, that each and every one of you reach out to your House and Senate representatives and ask them to co-sponsor the legislation. Next slide, please. So the next bill we've been working on is the Connecting Youth to Jobs Act. There's 40 billion total in the bill. 30 billion would be a state and local formula. So that money would go to states and states would dole it out locally for subsidized youth employment programs with an emphasis on historically disadvantaged populations, which includes youth of color, out of school youth, youth experiencing homelessness using the education definition of homelessness, low income youth, youth impacted by criminal justice system, foster youth, and pregnant or parenting youth. And in addition, there would be 10 billion in competitive grants, program participants, and work-based learning opportunities. These, again, community-based organizations or local government agencies or employment or employers, or even partnerships. So a community-based organization could apply with a government agency, or they could apply with an employer, or multiple community-based organizations could apply collaboratively. And this money could also provide housing, healthcare, transportation, childcare, access to technology, and more. So very flexible use of funds, which we have really heard loud and clear from providers and young people that there has got to be more flexibility in how federal funds can be used so we can actually meet the needs of young people. So the status on this is it's definitely a marker bill. We're not going to get 40 billion. And depending on where we land with budget reconciliation or Build Back Better or the infrastructure package, whatever kind of you're hearing it called in the news, is that we were expecting 4 to 10 billion of some version of this program. Obviously, in a consolidated bill, it's not going to be a 30-page new program. It would be maybe like 2 or 3 pages of text. So we are still advocating for this program to be included with the White House and with leadership in the Senate and the House with our partners. And we'll keep you all updated. Next slide, please. The next thing we've been working on to hopefully be included in budget reconciliation, which is up in the air, is a key fix to the low-income housing tax credit program. So we've endorsed the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which does a lot to improve and expand the low-income housing tax credit program. But the one big part of the bill that we've really been pushing is to fix the current problem that right now, if you're living in low-income housing tax credit funded housing, you cannot be a full-time student. This means that young people are choosing to either attend college part-time or not at all, or because you can't do full-time and live in affordable housing. So there is a solution to this issue in the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, and we have been advocating that this part of the bill is included in budget reconciliation because there are other parts of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act that have been in previous versions of budget reconciliation, but not sure yet where it's going to stand. We do have an ongoing campaign on our website where you can send a message to your members of Congress and ask them to include this fix in budget reconciliation. Next slide, please. And I know we're short on time, so I'm going to move quick. So some of our requests for FY22, we've asked for $300 million for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program, plus some report language. We've also asked for $300 million for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act program. It seems like they're going to land around 150 million-ish each for FY22, but nothing's going to be final until the next year or till the end of the year. Next slide, please. And then in the T-HUD subcommittee, we've been advocating for $100 million for the HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Program. I don't think we're going to end at 100 million based on what I've seen, but probably more like 85 to 90 million. And then we have asked for $3.5 billion for the McKinney-Vento HUD Homelessness Assistance Grant Program. And I think we're going to end up at around 3.5 or 3.6 based on the bills that I've seen. Next slide, please. So we also are advocating for the Homeless Children and Youth Act, which would align the different federal definitions of homelessness across agencies and programs. Let's just skip through, sorry, to slide 38. Next one. So we do have a Take Action Center. I did mention it. You can go there, engage in our campaigns. You can just put in your contact information and your name, and you can just automatically send messages that we've kind of pre-written. You can add, your local information about your program, local stats, whatever you want in the field. We try to make it easy for you to take action and really reach out to your elected officials to get them to take action. And then I do think we have questions that have been asked. It's Q&A time now.
Yes, those questions have been burning. So folks have questions for me, Andrew, or Darla, or all three of us. Definitely get them out.
So I think the first question is for Andrew and Anthony. How to get youth to come to sessions, to meetings? Is it flyers, school? How do you ensure anonymity or comfort with speaking?
So one of the things I said was we're doing the strategic sharing and the competitive compensation. That's a big draw because oftentimes if programs are doing any sort of marketing, it's usually within kind of the same areas. This area is usually occupied by young people. So like drop-in centers, schools, different community life skills-based programs that offer things to youth who are in child welfare or juvenile justice system. And just going to those places and making sure that you're offering the young people a rate that is respectable to the time that they're committing, and also giving them a way to ensure that the information that they're giving you serves a purpose, right? And it's actually there to for the betterment of the system, rather than to kind of just have a young person kind of share their story just off of the strength of sharing it, right? And so I think that's one of the two big things. Obviously, flyers work. Any type of form of digital marketing or like paper marketing, any sort of media marketing works. It's just a matter of targeting it correctly. But one of the big things is compensation and just going to where the young people are, especially where certain areas have certain intersectionalities of different type of young people.
And
awesome.
I know we're at time, so being respectful of that. So I don't know if anything you want to say, Darla, to wrap up before tossing it to Susan.
Let's just go through the next slides really quick. First, we want to invite you all to our National Summit on Youth Homelessness and Hill Day in March. You'll get to hear from Anthony, Andrew, all of our incredible young people and providers. Also, we encourage you all to partner with us as a member. And we do offer training and technical assistance. We do have fee-for-service consulting, so you can get the expertise of Andrew and Anthony, and then Yuri, who leads our National Youth Advisory Council. So if you are interested in getting support for your community, your program, please reach out and let us know. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And all the slides and the recording will be available for everybody. NRS has our slides, and so I think they'll be sharing that out with everyone. And just thank you to NRS for inviting us. It's been great.
Thank you. Have a good week, guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all three of you. We really appreciate it. Thank you for all the great information that you've shared. Just to emphasize and remind folks, this is the first in a series of 3 different lunch and learns that we'll be hosting, along with a number of other national events, activities, and access to other great resources and information. As Darla mentioned, we will be sharing out the recording as well as the slides. There's all of that information will be available on the NRPM website, which I think the link was included, but we will follow up with all of you as well. And then please tune in. We actually are launching a new podcast series, which will be highlighting, which is right in line with the kind of theme that you've been hearing throughout this great conversation, which is about the importance of the youth voice and the youth voice at the table around making decisions and recommendations, et cetera. And so we are launching a new Let's Talk podcast series that will be doing just that and sharing out stories, perspectives, and thoughts from young people across the country throughout NRPM. So with that said, off to the rest of your day. Many, many thanks. Thanks again to National Network for Youth for your time, your wisdom, your guidance, and everything else, your partnership. And thanks to all of you for all of the work that you're doing across the country and for being partnering with us as well. So happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Thank you all.